This is the book I'm currently reading, The Mommy Myth, the idealization of motherhood and how it has undermined women. So let's get into a few things. So feminism happened in the 70s, but there was a build-up to it and there was a need for it because women were going back to work, and they were going to work for a few reasons. They didn't want to be vulnerable, and they didn't want to be completely dependent on males. So the bottom part of the highlight was, I'm going to speak to that first. The women worked because they didn't want to be financially or emotionally vulnerable. Several said that if you worked, you enjoyed more equality in your home. During this time in the 50s and 60s or in early 70s, husbands could literally just walk away. There was no child support back then because some of these things get born out of necessity. So these women wanted to go to work so that they could have some security and survive. So going up to the top of my highlights. In Double Jeopardy, The Working Motherhood Trap, two working mothers talked about how important it had been for them to compare notes, learn from each other's mistakes, and devise ways of balancing home and career that no books ever talked about. Because who was talking about this? And back in this time, it's not like there was social media. This was not some rose-colored view of working motherhood, but a frank discussion of all the double binds that working mothers faced. Employers thought that if you put your kids before your job, you were disloyal, but if you put your job before your kids, you were unnatural. A babysitter who would stimulate love and care for the children is a rarity. And keep in mind, this was in 1974. Okay, now this part. The math alone tells the story of the impact of both the women's movement and the rotten economy on motherhood. In 1970, 40% of married mothers worked. In 1984, 59% of married mothers worked. And only 24% of mothers with a child under 1 year or younger worked. In 1984, 46.8% of mothers with a child under 1 worked. Black married mothers were even more likely to be in the labor force than their white counterparts. Single-parent households increased by a whopping 79% during the 70s, and 90% of those were headed by women. The years 1975 to 1980 witnessed an especially large surge. The participation of married mothers in the labor force grew faster than 1970 to 1975 or 1980 to 1985. And the most rapid increase between 1970 and 85 was among mothers of very young children. Participation rates of mothers or of infants under 1 year of age doubled. Okay, part 2. Now, did our government officials, well aware of such figures, say to mothers of America, what can we do to ensure your success as a mother and worker? Of course not. There were very few daycare centers, and there was no maternity leave, paid or unpaid. There was no flex time. There were no after-school programs. There was not even the Stingy Family Leave Act. If your kid got sick and you worked, you called in and said you were sick, so as to not make it seem like being a decent mother interfered with your job. And the two most important inventions for the working mother, the microwave and the VCR, were not widely available yet. So these are all of the things that we did not yet have that people of right now take for granted. Daycare and paid time off. But as more and more women went into the workforce, there was a need for it and things were created. So the things that you take for granted right now, there were people that were fighting for your rights to have them. Okay, I know a lot of this is highlighted, but I wanted to make sure that I touched on all of this. A lot of women started pooling their resources and their time and energy because there was a need for it. Because like I said, there was no daycares, there was no after school programs. Now, how did they do that? So Jane Addams reported on groups of mothers in different cities who had gotten together to pool their resources. One group set up a grocery shopping collective, another a errands collective. Others combined carpooling to Little League with overlapping dentist and doctor's appointments. So one mom took several kids at the same time to get their teeth cleaned or to get their shots. McCall's also introduced us to 4 single mothers, all of whom were looking for a place to live, but could barely afford an apartment, let alone a house, because their salaries were so paltry. They also needed childcare and companionship. One recent divorcee advertised for a roommate in the paper, and by the time the dust settled, she had found 3 women to share a large house with, which also allowed them to pool their resources, hire one sitter for all of their kids, and share in food preparation and babysitting. So basically, what I'm showing is how women see a need and create what they need together. And this was in the 70s. So obviously, with all of the resources that we have right now, it shows and it helps you understand how women can and do organize. Especially since we now have social media, we can speak about our needs and create, these things that we need together. Anyways, jump in the comments. Tell me what you think of what you see. Like, comment, and share.